My Lords, no one had proposed anything like the Northern Ireland Protocol until the second half of 2017. It's worth just recalling the genesis. I was a member of the European Parliament at the time and following the negotiations. In the immediate aftermath of the referendum, no one in Brussels proposed that Northern Ireland should remain under EU jurisdiction for regulatory purposes. They understood that sovereign countries are not in the business of ceding part of their territory to foreign control. They understood that sovereign countries don't normally allow internal borders. And so all the talk then was about finding technical solutions, Enda Kenny's government in Dublin negotiating in good faith with British authorities to try and find ways to keep the border open on the basis that the UK and the EU had pretty similar regulatory norms and could trust each other's standards. What changed? It was a very sudden moment around about October 2017. In fact, I remember Guy Verhofstadt coming to the Constitutional Affairs Committee with his customary self-satisfied grin and saying, "We've now made it part of our negotiating mandate that there mustn't be any change in the EU side of the single market regulations as pertain to Northern Ireland." Well, of course, what had changed? I think we all know the answer. What had changed was that on the 8th of June 2017 there was a general election, and that altered the balance in the other place. And from then, it became clear that there was a majority of people in both chambers here who were not prepared to leave the European Union except on terms that Brussels liked. Now, that wasn't the phrase they used. The phrase they used was, "We will not permit a no-deal Brexit." But, my lords, think about it for 5 seconds. That's exactly the same, isn't it? So, of course, the European Union, not unreasonably, I don't blame them, started then putting on the table all sorts of outlandish demands that up until then it had not occurred to them to make. Now, plenty of people have said Parliament ought to assert itself in this situation. OK, fine. But it does strike me as a little bit inconsistent for noble lords who were strongly in favour of this no-deal Brexit stance, who then, if you like, ensured that this treaty was signed under duress, now to turn around and say, "Oh, you told us it was a great treaty. How come you've changed your mind after 3 years?" It was signed in a moment of EU overreach, and it was bound to be corrected when the majority in another place changed. And I'm bound to add there is something slightly odd about saying, after 3 years of negotiations, shouldn't we have a little bit more time to talk? I mean, what do you think, my lords, we've been doing for the last 3 years? I'd like to put a question, because I'm one of the last speakers. I think 54 noble lords have spoken. And as far as I can tell, no one has taken issue with the contents as set out by my noble friend, the Minister. But correct me if I'm wrong. But the aims of the bill, that there should be the freedom of companies in Northern Ireland that do not export to follow either UK or EU regulation, that there should be a green channel so that goods that are not intended for onward export are not subject to additional checks or tests, that Northern Ireland should be part of the general principle of no taxation without representation, and that the treaty should be arbitrated in the same way that all other international accords are. Are those unreasonable demands? I mean, if anyone, I see a couple of Lib Dem peers theatrically pulling Paxman-esque leers of incredulity. Perhaps you just say, yeah, by all means. Of course, I'll give way.
Yeah. I'll give way then, since he's referred obviously to me. I'm just wondering if the noble lord's assertion, which is a serious one, that Parliament was misled by the Prime Minister of the day, that the deal that they were presenting to Parliament was made under duress, because we were not informed about that case. That's the case that he's making. Is that correct?
Absolutely no question that the Northern Ireland Protocol would not have been agreed had there not been an anti-Brexit majority in another House that was saying in terms and had taken the legislative agenda and legislated to say that they would not permit Brexit to happen except on terms that Brussels liked. So let me just finish by saying, if there is a conflict between respecting the basis of the Good Friday Agreement, which rests on the idea of devolution and power sharing, and an overseas treaty obligation, I hope that any British government would pursue the former objective. And that should go almost without saying. If we weren't in this situation where a large chunk of the country will automatically want to side with the EU, whatever its position is, that would be an almost banal statement. If there is a conflict between the protocol and our obligation to the people of Northern Ireland, I hope that any British government would honour its obligation to the people of Northern Ireland.
Could my noble friend just give way for one moment?
That the